Tonight I want us to look at a book that I've come across in recent days. I think this is one of the best books I've ever seen dealing with the subject of addictions. Now, the title of the book is Addictions, A Banquet in the Grave, Finding Hope in the Power of the Gospel. Now, this is written by Edward T. Welch, and it's part of his Resources for Changing Lives series. And like I say, this is a wonderful, wonderful book. Let me just tell you a little bit about the book, and then we're going to get into it in just a few minutes. And hopefully we can spend the next weeks talking about reading from and learning from this book. Ed Welch is a Christian, and he believes, based upon the facts and Scripture, that addictions is a worship disorder. He says, will we worship ourselves and our own desires, or will we worship the true God? He talks about how that Scripture reveals an addict's true condition. It's like guests at a banquet thrown by the woman called Folly in Proverbs chapter 9. Those that are at her banquet are already in the grave. He says, can we not escape our addictions following Jesus? We have immense hope that God can give power so that we're no longer mastered by our addictions. Here's some of the endorsements of the book. John Freeman from Harvest USA says, this is one of the most helpful books providing practical theology on addictions. Welch's assessment of addictions as a problem that proceeds from the heart, involving issues of worship and idolatry. He says that is central to helping people grow and change. This is vital reading for church leaders and for friends and family desiring to help those who are struggling with addictions. And then let's hear from Peter Garrich. Peter is a preacher and a counselor at Dayspring Center for Biblical Counseling. And by the way, he's an ex-heroin addict. He says, this book destroys the myth that addiction is a disease and that sin is a sickness. Welch shows in the book that the hopeless cycle of sickness, recovery, and relapse must be replaced with the biblical view of sin, salvation, and sanctification. As a pastor, Peter says, as a biblical counselor, and a redeemed, not a recovering, but a redeemed ex-heroin addict, he says, I believe that Welch has given every pastor, parishioner, and anyone caught in the bondage of idolatry addiction a biblical roadmap to lasting freedom. And then one more. This is Robert Imberger. He says, this book is biblically sound, practical, filled with Christ-like compassion. This much-needed book offers real hope and promise of victory to those struggling with addiction. So again, the book is Addictions, A Banquet in the Grave. And of course, I want to, week after week, be putting good things before you, helping you to see things that maybe are new books or new insights. And in this book, we're going to see two main parts. We're going to see part one, which is thinking theologically. Welch says that we as creatures made in the image of God, created by God, that we must think theologically. Now, the word theological comes from two words, theo, and the last part of the word there speaks of study, the study of God, theology. And of course, there's many different types of ology, but this is what was called back in the Reformers' day the queen of the sciences. In other words, at the universities there in England and in Europe, the universities looked at theology as the top science. It's the queen of all the sciences. If you throw theology out, then you'll not understand all the other sciences, like anthropology, the study of man. You've got to have first theology, the study of God and His Word. So, part one of this book is talking about thinking theologically. And there's four sections in that part one. Practical theology, meaning it's not just theology way up here above our heads, but this is practical theology. Secondly, he's talking about sin, sickness, or is addiction both? He'll deal with that. We'll look at that. Then part three says, new ways of seeing. Part of our problem is that we see things the way we've always seen them, and we need a new way to see things and understand things. And then section 4 under part 1, the descent into addiction. The descent, the going down into addiction. And that's part 1 of this book. It's a book of about 300 pages, but that's the first section of the book. Now the second part 2 of the book, is what he calls essential theological themes. In other words, there are certain themes throughout the scriptures that he's going to deal with that directly impact this thing called addiction. He says, here's one, speaking the truth in love. He deals with that, how that we need the truth, and we are to speak the truth to one another in love. We don't have freedom because we don't have truth. And when people are not giving truth to those who are in need, like addicts, we're not helping them. We might temporarily fix a problem, but we're not helping them in the long run. So we must speak the truth in love. So that's one of the essential theological themes. Then he says, respecting, listening, and inviting. He's going to show us the theological theme about that. Knowing the Lord, fearing the Lord, turning from lies, turning from that which is false. The theme, saying no. Here's one, staying violent. That's the theme of Scripture. And then being part of the body. Now these are all things that you might not understand how is that relating, but he's going to explain that through the book. So 2 main parts. The first part, thinking theologically. The second part, essential theological themes that we need to understand. Now there are some illustrations in this book, and I intend to put those up so that you can see those also. He gives several illustrations. He shows the illustration of the dual nature of sin, addictions at the intersection of our sin and the innumerable influences on our lives. That's an interesting illustration. And I'm talking about, these will be visual illustrations that you'll see. The illustration of sin and its consequences. The early cycles of addiction, rebellion. The later stages of addiction, bondage. The descent into idolatry. Essential features of all addictions. The process of change. All of these are illustrations that he has in the books that I will show you on the screen in the video. Now let me just read a little bit now. Getting into the book, this is the preface. Always read the preface of a book, because here the author is giving you some insights into the why of the book. and he'll explain some things. It'll be like a key that will help unlock the rest of the book. So in the preface, he says there's an accepted tradition among those who struggle with addictions that goes something like this. Helping yourself will help others, and helping others will help yourself. If an alcoholic learns to take his soul to task, it will bless family, friends, co-workers, and probably many others. If that same alcoholic looks out for the needs of others and goes out of his or her way to serve another drinker, then that person will most certainly be blessed in some way. With this in mind, the material that follows will examine both ourselves and those we want to help. It might seem awkward to think about our own struggles in one paragraph and then focus on another person in the next paragraph. But in a book that considers the human heart and the Christ of the Scripture, there can be no other way that we look at it. Preachers must preach to themselves before they preach to others. Counselors are always counselees. They are being counseled by someone else or by the Scripture. He says you'll probably come to this book with a particular role in mind. For example, Ed Welch says, I came with the idea of helping others. But as I dug into the Scripture's teaching on the reckless nature of the human heart and its rich teaching on self-control, it made me see that I needed this help as well. So thinking about your own struggles is the best way to start. Even though the focus of this book will be primarily on drugs, alcohol, and other types of addictions, the basic ideas are relevant to all kinds of sins that are not easily cast off. Looking for activities or substances that might entice you, leaving you wanting to come back for more, even though more may not be wise, godly, or they might not even be legal. Look especially at the activities that provide you with a fairly rapid bodily experience. Scriptures, targets, sex, alcohol, and food. But there are other things that the Scripture warns us about. Now, what's the basic point of this book? Theology makes a difference. It's the infrastructure of our lives. Build it poorly, and the building will eventually collapse in ruins. Build it well, you'll be prepared for anything. The basic theology for addictions is that the root problem goes deeper than our genetic makeup. Addictions are ultimately a disorder of worship. Will we worship ourselves and our own desires, or will we worship the true God? Through this lens, all Scripture comes alive for the addict. No longer are there just a few proof texts about drunkenness in the Scripture. Instead, since all Scripture addresses our fundamental disorder of worship, all Scripture will then be rich and applicable for the addict. What follows will, I hope, seem radical, Ed Welch says. Rightly understood Scripture will always seem radical, leaving us amazed and a bit off balance. But a Christ-centered perspective on addiction should definitely be revolutionary. We're living in a culture where the theory and language of addictions are presently controlled by secular categories. Words like disease, treatment, and even addiction convey the idea that these problems have their ultimate cause in the body rather than the soul, a commonly accepted view that is at odds with clear biblical teaching. Given the domination of this secular perspective, careful biblical inspection will most likely reveal many layers of error in our thinking about addictions. And it might even take years and the insights of many people to uncover all of these layers of misunderstanding. Thinking biblically about these difficult problems will require much more than redefining words or making Jesus the higher power. Instead, everything must be open to biblical inspection. Since we live in a culture that assumes a sub-biblical position, meaning below Scripture, not looking to Scripture, but it's something that's, for uneducated people or just religious people. No, since we live in a culture that assumes a sub-biblical position, we must realize that it affects us more than we think. For those who have been keeping track of cultural trends, what follows might not seem that radical. There are more and more probing and insightful voices, secular and Christian, that are questioning the legitimacy of current views about addiction. So this book is certainly not alone. I hope, however, that it can contribute wisdom and practical help to this very important area of debate and struggle.